The market was full of noise, voices rising and falling like waves. Sellers shouted about fruits, tools, and worn-out clothes. Buyers haggled and argued. Children ran through the narrow lanes with laughter. But in one corner, away from the bright stalls and warm lanterns, stood a woman with skin marked by faint glowing lines. She was not human. Her eyes were large and silver, her skin pale blue like the night sky, and two small children clung to her torn cloak. Her face showed hunger and fear, but more than that, it showed loneliness. She was a widow from a war nobody cared to remember, a stranger in a colony that looked at her people with suspicion and cruelty. She tried to sell scraps she had found, small pieces of metal and cloth, but no one wanted them. A merchant spat on the ground and told her to go back where she came from. Another laughed and asked if she planned to sell her children next. She pulled her little ones closer, her hands shaking. Her children were thin, their eyes wide with the kind of fear no child should know. The older one carried a broken toy. The younger one pressed her face into her mother's side. The crowd moved around them, ignoring their suffering. Some looked with pity, but no one stopped to help. The woman whispered softly to her children, "Stay close, stay quiet." Her voice cracked with exhaustion. She had not eaten properly in days, her children even less, but she kept moving, hoping someone would show mercy. Then, in the center of the market, she saw a human man. He was simple, dressed in a worker's uniform stained with oil and dust. He carried tools in a heavy bag. His face was tired, but his eyes were not cruel. He had the look of someone who had spent his life working in silence, unnoticed. The widow's heart pounded. She felt something strange, something desperate. She pushed her way through the crowd, dragging her children with her. People muttered as she passed, calling her shameless, but she did not stop. She fell to her knees in front of the man. Her cloak slipped, revealing her bruised arms. Her silver eyes filled with tears. The market went silent, as if everyone waited to see what would happen. The man looked down, confused. He stepped back as the woman's voice broke through the silence. "Please," she whispered. "Please, marry me. Protect my children." Gasps filled the air. Someone laughed loudly. Another shouted that she had gone mad. A few voices mocked. A human husband for a broken alien? What a joke. But the widow did not care. She pressed her forehead to the ground, her hands trembling. The children clung to her, their small bodies shaking. One of them began to cry, but she hushed them quickly. Her tears fell onto the dirt. She spoke again, louder this time. "I have nothing left, my people are gone. If no human protects us, they will take my children away." The man's heart froze. He did not understand. He had never spoken to her before, never even thought of marriage. He was poor, alone, and invisible to the world. Yet now, the eyes of the entire market were on him, waiting for his answer. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He felt the weight of judgment around him. He heard the whispers. If he accepts, he is a fool. If he rejects, he is wise. But when he looked at the children, he saw their fear. He saw the hope in their eyes, a fragile hope that someone would care. The widow lifted her face. Her silver eyes shone with tears. Her voice was low but steady. "I do not ask for love. I ask for protection. Take me, and my children will live. Refuse me, and they will die." The man stood frozen. His chest tightened. His mind screamed at him to walk away, to escape before it was too late. But his heart would not move. Around them, the market grew louder. Some shouted insults, others waited for the drama to unfold. Children pointed, merchants whispered, and yet in that moment, the world felt quiet. To the man he saw not an alien, not a beggar, not a widow, but a mother who had nothing left except her children. And he saw himself, a man who had nothing except his own weary hands. The silence stretched on. The widow remained on her knees, trembling. Her children hid their faces. The crowd leaned closer, waiting for the human's decision. And in that shadowed corner of the market, a desperate plea had turned into something far greater, a choice that would change everything. The market did not return to its noise right away. For a long moment, everyone stared at the strange sight of a human worker standing frozen, while an alien widow begged at his feet. Her children clung to her sides. their small eyes looking up at him as if he was the last hope in the world. The man's name was Daniel. He had always been invisible in this colony. He worked long hours repairing machines, sweeping halls, and fixing what others broke. No one ever looked at him with respect. He had no family, no close friends. His life was simple, quiet, and lonely. Now for the first time, all eyes were on him. The crowd waited. Some whispered that he would laugh and walk away. Others smirked, saying no human would lower himself to protect an alien. Daniel felt his face burn with shame, not because of the woman, but because he could feel the sharp weight of their judgment pressing down on him. "Get up," he muttered quickly, trying. To help the widow rise, his voice shook. "You should not beg like this," but the widow did not move. Her silver eyes were locked on him, wet with tears. "Please," she whispered again. "They will take my children if no human claims us. They will be sold, used, broken. I have no strength left. Only you can stop it." The words pierced Daniel like a knife. He looked at her children, thin and trembling. The older one clutched the broken toy tighter. The younger one buried her face in her mother's torn cloak. They did not speak, but their silence was heavier than any words. Daniel's chest ached. He wanted to look away, to pretend he had not heard her. He wanted to escape the laughter of the market. But something inside him refused to turn away. The crowd laughed again. "Don't be a fool," a merchant shouted. "If you marry her, you'll lose everything." Another sneered. "She's using you, human. She'll drag you into her misery." Daniel clenched his fists. His life was already hard. He worked each day to earn just enough to eat. If he took in the widow and her children, the colony leaders would not stay silent. He might lose his job, his home, his fragile peace. He would become a target of mockery and cruelty. But when he looked at the widow again, he saw her lips trembling as she tried to hold back her tears. He saw her children shivering, and he felt a strange anger rise in him, not at her, but at the voices around them, the cruelty of people who had more than enough yet refused to give even a drop of kindness. "Why me?" Daniel finally asked, his voice low, almost breaking. "Out of all the humans here, why choose me?" The widow lowered her head. "Because you looked at me without hate," she said softly. "Because your eyes were tired, but not cruel. I do not need a rich man. I need a good man. I need someone who will not let my children be taken." Daniel's heart pounded. He had never thought of himself as a good man, only an ordinary one. Yet now, this desperate woman believed he was the difference between life and death. The crowd grew restless. Some shouted at him to walk away. A few even stepped forward, trying to pull him aside, but he did not move. His feet felt heavy, rooted to the ground. He could not say yes. Not yet. Fear held him. Fear of losing his already small place in this harsh colony. Fear of becoming an outcast. Fear of making a promise he could not keep, and yet he could not say no either. The thought of turning his back on her haunted him in the very moment. He knew if he walked away, her children would be dragged into darkness, and he would live forever with the weight of their cries. The widow finally rose from the ground, but her knees shook. She held her children close, her voice low. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should not have asked. I will find another way." She turned to leave, her children pulling on her cloak. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His hand twitched as if to reach out. His heart screamed, but his lips were sealed. The crowd began to laugh again. Some shouted that the show was over. Others mocked her shamelessness. But as Daniel watched her walk away, something inside him broke. He felt as if a door was closing forever. He did not know if he had the strength to stop it. But he knew one thing with certainty. He could not forget the silver eyes filled with tears and the way those children looked at him with desperate hope. He stood in the center of the market, torn between fear and compassion. The weight of his choice pressed down like a mountain, and though he had not spoken his decision, the path ahead was already forming in his heart. For Daniel, the dilemma had only begun. Night fell over the colony. The bright lights of the market were gone, and the narrow streets grew cold and empty. Daniel walked home with heavy steps. His hands were still trembling from what had happened. He had not given an answer, but the Widow's voice would not leave his mind. Her words echoed, "They will take my children if no human claims us." Daniel lay on his bed staring at the cracked ceiling. But sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her silver eyes shining with tears, and he saw the faces of the children pressed close to her side. On the other side of the colony, the widow sat in the corner of an abandoned storage shed, her children curled beside her shivering. She wrapped her torn cloak around them, whispering softly, "We are safe for now." Her voice shook because she did not believe her own words. The older child, a boy no more than 8, spoke in a quiet voice, "Mother, they will come again, won't they?" His small hands gripped the broken toy he carried everywhere. The younger one, a girl no older than 5, hid her face in her mother's lap, afraid to hear the answer. The widow stroked their hair, her heart breaking. "I will protect you," she whispered, "no matter what." But her mind screamed with fear. She remembered the soldiers who came at night, pulling alien children from their mother's arms. She remembered the screams, the silence after. She knew her children were not safe without a protector. The boy looked up at her with eyes too old for his young face. "Mother, will the human help us?" The question struck her like an arrow. She did not know the answer. She only remembered the way Daniel's face looked, confused, torn, but not cruel. In another part of the colony, Daniel sat at a small table with a half-eaten meal. His hands gripped the cup so tightly his knuckles turned white. He could hear the laughter of his neighbors through the thin walls. He knew what they were saying. He knew they mocked him for standing in silence while an alien widow begged. He closed his eyes and saw the boy's trembling hands, the girl's wide, fearful eyes. He felt something stir inside him, something stronger than fear. It was anger, anger at the cruelty of his people, anger at himself for doing nothing. The next day, Daniel went back to work, fixing broken machines in the factory. But his mind was not on the gears and wires. It was with the children. He wondered if they had eaten. He wondered if they had a place to sleep. Every sound of metal reminded him of chains, and the thought made him sick. That evening, when the factory doors closed, Daniel did not go home. Instead, he walked toward the darker side of the colony. His steps were slow, unsure, but his heart pushed him forward. He searched the alleys and empty sheds until he finally found them. The widow was asleep against the wall, her arms wrapped around her children. The boy woke first, his silver eyes wide with fear as he saw Daniel. He shook his sister awake, whispering, "Don't cry, don't speak." The little girl clung to her. "Mother," her small voice barely a whisper. "Is it the soldiers?" Daniel froze at those words. His heart twisted. These children lived every moment in fear. They could not even see a human without thinking of danger. He knelt slowly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's me," he said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The widow stirred, her eyes opening. For a moment she looked ready to flee, but when she recognized Daniel, her body slumped in exhaustion. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice raw. Daniel looked at the children, then at her. "Because I couldn't forget them," he admitted. "I couldn't forget you." The boy stepped forward, clutching his broken toy like a weapon. His voice was small but steady. "If you leave us, they will take her, and they will take us too." Daniel's throat tightened. The child's words were not a plea, but a truth. He could see the fear in their eyes. Fear they had lived with too long. These were not just children. They were survivors, forced to grow up too soon. The widow's eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. Daniel placed a hand on the ground, his voice low. "I don't know if I can protect you. I don't know if I'm strong enough." The boy's answer was simple. "You're all we have." Silence filled the shed. The children pressed close to their mother. Daniel looked at them, and in that moment, he realized something. His life had always been small, unnoticed, empty. But here, in front of him, were lives that depended on him, lives that could be saved or lost by his choice. The fear in the children's eyes was no longer something he could ignore. It was a fire burning in his chest, demanding action. Daniel stood slowly, his fists tight. "Then I won't walk away," he whispered. And in the broken silence of the night, the children of fear finally found the smallest spark of hope. Morning came to the colony with its usual noise. The market streets filled with merchants calling out their prices, with customers haggling loudly, and with children running between stalls. Yet beneath the normal sounds, whispers moved like an unseen current. Everyone was talking about the alien widow and the human worker. Some laughed as they told the story, saying the alien had dropped to her knees and begged for marriage. Others added lies, saying Daniel had promised her already. Some cursed his name, calling him weak, calling him foolish for even listening to her. Daniel heard those whispers long before he reached the market. As he carried his tools to the factory, people stepped aside, not out of respect, but out of disgust. He felt their eyes on his back like daggers. He tried to ignore them, but the sound of their laughter stayed close. Inside the factory, the same thing continued. A coworker smirked. "So, Daniel, when's the wedding with your alien?" "Princess?" Another snorted. "Careful, he might ask you to be best man." The room erupted in laughter. Daniel forced himself to stay silent, his hands gripping the heavy machine parts until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to shout, to say he had not given an answer. But the truth was heavier. Deep inside, he knew his heart had already chosen. He could not walk away from the widow and her children. Across the market, the widow walked carefully with her children, trying to find scraps of food. She heard the laughter too, but sharper were the whispers that followed her every step. "Shameless creature," someone hissed. "Begging in public, how low she has fallen." Another voice, loud enough to sting. "She thinks a human will save her? She is dirt, and her children are dirt." The widow kept her head down, her hands shaking. Her children clung tightly to her cloak. The boy walked with his chin lifted, trying to be brave, but his trembling hands betrayed him. The girl buried her face against her mother, refusing to look at the people around them. For the widow, every step felt like walking through fire. She had lived with whispers before, but never this loud, never this cruel. Still, she told herself she could endure it. She had no choice. Not while her children needed her. Later that evening, when the stalls were closing, Daniel saw her again. She was standing at the edge of the market, her arms around her children, their bodies thin and weary. He walked toward her, ignoring the mocking voices behind him. The widow's eyes widened as he approached. "You should not stand here alone," Daniel said quietly. "The crowd is cruel." The widow lowered her gaze. "They are cruel everywhere," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but she straightened her shoulders. "I do not fear for myself. I fear only for them." She looked down at her children, who pressed close against her sides. Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her he would protect them, but the words stuck. He was still afraid of what the colony would do to him, afraid of losing the little he had. And yet, as he stood there, a stone flew past his shoulder. It struck the wall behind him with a sharp crack. Laughter erupted from a group of young men. "Look, the human dog has found his alien wife," one shouted. Another picked up another stone, aiming again. Daniel's chest burned. He stepped forward, shielding the widow and her children with his body. His voice rose, low but firm. "Enough," the men sneered. "Or what?" one asked. But Daniel did not move. His fists clenched, his eyes steady. For the first time, he did not feel invisible. He felt anger and courage burning inside him. The widow stared at him, her silver eyes wide. She had not expected him to stand in front of her like that. The children clung to his legs now, their small hands gripping his trousers as if he was already their protector. The crowd grew silent for a moment, whispers buzzing louder. Some were mocking, but a few were curious. A few voices even softened, murmuring that perhaps the human was not a fool. Perhaps he was something else. That night the whispers spread again, but they were not all cruel anymore. Some called Daniel reckless, some called him cursed, but others spoke quietly, saying there was a man who dared to stand between a widow and her tormentors. Daniel lay in bed, staring into the dark. His body ached from work, his mind burned from shame and anger. But when he closed his eyes, he saw the children clinging to him. He saw the widow's eyes filled with both fear and hope. The whispers of the market had tried to break him, but instead they had given him a choice he could know. Longer avoid. The next morning, Daniel woke with a heavy heart. His body was tired from long hours at the factory, but his mind was heavier from the choice he knew was waiting for him. He had spent the whole night hearing the widow's voice, hearing the children's, small whispers of fear, and seeing their eyes begging him not to walk away. The colony had already decided what it thought of him. Everywhere he walked, the stares followed. Some eyes were mocking, some full of disgust. A few even looked with a kind of cruel amusement, as if they wanted to see how far Daniel would fall. It was no longer just whispers now, it was judgment, spoken loud in the streets. At the market, the widow stood again, her children close beside her. They had no food, no shelter, no safety. Daniel could see their clothes were even more torn, their bodies weaker than before. The boy's broken toy hung from his hand. The little girl's eyes were swollen from crying. The widow herself looked pale, her silver eyes dull from exhaustion. Daniel walked straight to them, ignoring the noise of the crowd. When the widow saw him, her lips parted, but she said nothing. She only looked at him with a question in her eyes, a question that held both hope and fear. "Come with me," Daniel said quietly. His voice was steady, though his heart raced. "We cannot stay here." The widow hesitated. "You know what this means," she whispered. "If you take us in, they will turn against you. You will lose your work, your peace, even your safety." Daniel nodded. He had thought of all of that, but he had also thought of her children being dragged away in chains, and that image haunted him more than the thought of losing everything. "I know," he said, "but I also know I cannot leave you here." The widow's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head slowly. "I never wanted to destroy your life, I only wanted to save theirs." Her voice cracked as she pulled her children closer. "If you walk away now, I will not hate you." Daniel looked at her, then at the children. His hands shook, but his voice was firm. "I will not walk away." The crowd erupted with noise. Merchants shouted insults, men laughed, women covered their mouths in shock. "The fool has chosen," someone cried. "He binds himself to an alien widow." Stones were thrown again, curses filled the air. But Daniel stood firm. He reached out and placed his hand on the widow's shoulder, guiding her and the children away from the market. As they walked, people followed, jeering and mocking. Daniel felt each word like a blade, but he kept moving. His jaw was tight, his steps unshaken. The children pressed close to him, the boy gripping his leg, the girl holding his hand. For the first time, they did not look as if they were about to break. When they reached Daniel's small home, he opened the door and let them in. The widow stood in the doorway for a long moment, as if she did not believe this was real. Her children rushed inside, their eyes wide as they looked at the small table, the simple bed, and the cracked walls. To them, it was not broken. It was safe. Daniel closed the door behind them, his heart pounding. He knew there was no turning back now. The price of his decision would be high. Already he could imagine the factory master refusing him work, the neighbors spitting at his feet, the leaders of the colony marking him as a traitor. He had chosen to protect an alien widow and her children, and the colony would never forgive him. But when he turned and saw the little girl smiling faintly for the first time, his chest ached with something deeper than fear. It was worth it. The widow sank into the chair, her eyes filled with silent tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for us?" Daniel knelt before her, his voice low. "Because no one else would, and because I could not watch them take your children." Her hands trembled as she covered her face. The children crawled into Daniel's lap without fear, resting their heads against him. His heart broke and healed at the same time. He had lost the colony, but in that moment, he felt he had found something greater. Outside, the voices of hatred grew louder. Stones struck the walls of his home, curses filled the air. The colony had declared him a fool, but Daniel did not move. He sat with the widow and her children, knowing the storm had only begun. The price of protection was heavy, but he was ready to carry it. The storm began the next morning. Daniel woke to the sound of voices outside his small home. At first he thought it was only neighbors passing, but when he opened the door, he saw them standing there. Men, women, even children, all gathered with sharp eyes and cruel mouths. Word had spread through the colony faster than fire. The human worker had taken in the alien widow. He had let her and her children live under his roof, and now the colony wanted him to pay for it. "You shame us," one man shouted, his face red with anger. "A human standing with filth," a woman spat on the ground. "You bring disease into our streets," another voice rose. "Cast them out before it is too late." Daniel stood in the doorway, his jaw tight. Behind him, the widow held her children close. The boy clutched his broken toy, ready to fight with nothing but wood and string. The little girl hid behind her mother's legs, trembling. "They are under my protection," Daniel said. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "If you want them gone, you will have to go through me." Laughter broke out, cruel and mocking. Stones were lifted, curses shouted. Daniel felt the first rock strike his shoulder, then another against his chest. The crowd was not here to talk, they wanted to drive him out. Inside, the widow whispered, "Please, do not fight for us. They will kill you." Her silver eyes were wide with terror, but Daniel shook his head. "If I stand aside, they will take your children. I cannot let that happen." The crowd surged forward, some trying to push past him into the house. Daniel blocked the doorway with his body, his arms outstretched. "Enough!" he roared. His voice echoed down the street. For a moment, the people hesitated, surprised by the fire in a man they had always ignored. The widow stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud. "We are not your enemies," she cried. "We only want to live. My children are not your curse." Her words were met with jeers, but not all the faces looked cruel anymore. A few lowered their eyes, ashamed. Daniel seized that moment. "Look at them," he shouted, pointing to the children clinging to their mother. "They are hungry. They are afraid, and you throw stones at them. What kind of people are we if this is how we treat the weak?" A silence fell over part of the crowd, but others grew angrier. "He has chosen aliens over his own kind," someone shouted. The crowd split between those who wanted blood and those who felt a spark of doubt. For hours, the storm raged. Neighbors cursed him. Factory workers swore they would see him fired. Merchants said they would never sell to him. Again, Daniel stood in the doorway the entire time, taking the insults, taking the stones, never moving. His body ached, his clothes torn, but his eyes never lowered. When night finally came, the crowd scattered, leaving broken stones in the street and silence in their place. Daniel closed the door, his shoulders heavy. The widow touched his arm gently, her voice soft. "You cannot fight the whole world." Daniel looked at her, then at the children curled on the floor. "Maybe not," he said quietly. "But I can fight for you." The little girl climbed into his lap, her small hands touching his bruised face. "Did we make you hurt?" she asked in a whisper. Daniel shook his head, forcing a smile. "No, little one. You made me strong." The widow's eyes filled with tears. She had begged for help, but she had never believed anyone would truly stand against the storm, yet. This human, ordinary, poor, forgotten, had done what no one else dared. Outside, the hatred of the colony grew. Plans were being made to drive Daniel out for good. But inside that small, broken home, something new was growing. A bond stronger than fear, a family forged in fire. Daniel knew the storm was not over. He knew worse would come. But when he looked at the widow and her children, he felt no regret. For in their eyes he saw something he had never known before. Trust, and that trust was worth every stone, every curse, every wound. The days that followed were not easy. The storm of hatred did not pass quickly. Daniel lost his work at the factory. The master told him coldly, "We do not hire men who sleep beside aliens." Merchants turned their backs on him, refusing to sell him food or tools. Children threw stones at his home, and neighbors whispered cruel words each time he stepped outside. But inside the small house, life began to change. The widow cooked with what little they had, turning scraps into meals. Her children filled the rooms with laughter that had not been heard before. The boy repaired his broken toy with Daniel's tools, proud when he made it whole again. The girl sang softly as she played, her voice sweet and full of light. Daniel had never known such warmth. For years he had lived in silence, coming home to empty walls and quiet nights. Now, when he opened the door, he was greeted by small arms around his waist, by soft voices calling his name, by eyes that looked at him with trust. The widow, too, changed. She still carried sorrow in her eyes, but her shoulders no longer bent under despair. She spoke more, her voice steady. She looked at Daniel not as a stranger, but as someone she could lean on. At night, when the children slept, they would talk in whispers, about the past she had lost, about the future he was afraid of. In those moments, something fragile but strong grew between them. Still, the world outside did not forget. Men came to his door one night, warning him to send the widow away. "You cannot fight the whole colony," they sneered. Daniel stood firm, his body blocking the door. "Then let the whole colony come," he answered. His voice no longer shook. The widow touched his arm after they left, her eyes shining with tears. "You are risking everything," she whispered. Daniel looked at her children sleeping on the floor, then back at her. "Everything I had before was nothing," he said. "Now I have something worth protecting." The children slowly lost their fear. The boy began to walk through the streets beside Daniel, his head high. The girl no longer hid behind her mother's cloak. She skipped along, clutching Daniel's hand. Some people still spat at them, but others began to look away in shame. A few even offered quiet kindness, leaving bread at the door, or a blanket when the nights grew cold. Change came slowly, but it came. Not everyone in the colony was blind. Some began to see that Daniel's choice was not weakness, but strength. They whispered less, mocked less, and though hatred still burned, in many hope had begun to grow in a few. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel sat with the widow and her children outside the house. The air was quiet, the sky painted with gold. The boy leaned against him, the girl rested in her mother's lap. For the first time in many years, Daniel felt peace. The widow turned to him, her silver eyes glowing softly in the fading light. "I begged you to protect us," she said, her voice gentle. "But I never expected you to give us more than that." Daniel frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She smiled, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "You gave us a home. You gave my children back their laughter. You gave me back my strength." Daniel's chest tightened. He looked at her, then at the children, and for the first time, he allowed himself to see the truth. He had not only protected them, they had healed him. The little girl climbed into his lap, her tiny hands clutching his shirt. "Will you always stay with us?" she asked in a soft voice. Daniel kissed the top of her head. "Always," he whispered. The boy smiled, his silver eyes bright with something stronger than hope. "Trust." The widow lowered her head, her hand brushing against Daniel's, and in that quiet touch was a promise deeper than words. They had faced hatred, they had faced hunger, they had faced fear. Yet together they had built something stronger, a family not born of blood but of choice. As the night fell and the stars appeared above the broken colony, Daniel knew his life had changed forever. He was no longer invisible, no longer empty. He was a protector, a father, a partner. And though the world outside still raged with cruelty, inside this small home there was light. And that light, forged in struggle and kindness, would never fade.